afternoon, everyone. And welcome to our the first ever Cafe Scientifique of the Department of Science Communication. We're so close, diba? this is a bit, so intimate. Wait. Hi, sir. I get it. Am I late? No. We're just sir. I can't. Maybe you can take this seat. Sorry kasi po dito sa Okay, so this activity is part of the Science Communication Week, SciC4D, the Science Communication for Development Week. So we're celebrating SciComm Week this week. We started with a conversation on Yolanda and the value of science communication. And then just last night we had this film showing about indigenous environmental ethics with the writer of the film, Busong, who is Henry Burgos. So he joined us last night and with the students as well. And today we're very glad to have all of you here. We're actually talking, Mami and I, about what to call you. Like, are we participants of Cafe Scientifique? Because the term participant is quite technical. Janelle, do you have any idea to call us ourselves right now? Like, coffee goers or coffee geek goers? I don't know. Okay. All right. So to start off, maybe I can call our department chair, Mr. Gary J. Montemayor, for some message.
Hi. I'm here. Welcome to the Cafe Scientifique, where we will discuss science topics that matter outside the walls of the university and over a cup of coffee. This is a part of the Science Communication Week that we are celebrating since March. Started on March 3 of the Department of Science Communication, College of Development Communication in UPL. For this year, we chose to focus on environmental risk and disaster communication. Hence, we have this topic. Now, DevCom's Department of Science Communication was established as one of the 4 units of the newly formed College of Development Communication back in 1998. But even before that, DevCom had already spearheaded several initiatives to communicate science to various publics. Science communication in DevCom was first articulated by
Debbie.
Science communication was first articulated by the late Dr. Johnny Hamyas in the early 1980s. And we are very fortunate that we have also one of the first science journalists that we have, Dr. Maslog here, back in the 1980s, where they started science communication along with Dr. Maria Teresa Velasco, which is now the Dean of the College of Development Communication. And science communication back then was conceptualized as an avenue where research results are communicated to identified stakeholders using different media and different popularization techniques. Now, this field had already evolved by going beyond mere popularization of scientific jargon. Science communication, DevCom style, also aims to help scientists to communicate research results to their fellow scientists. We also repackage information to technical people and communicate science to policymakers to assist them in designing policies. Science communication is also trying to value indigenous knowledge by appreciating what we call lay expertise, and also trying to educate people and mobilize them in order to actively participate in scientific discourses that matter to them. As you can see, SciComm, DevCom style is not very media-centric like those found in science communication curriculum from other countries, because we kept our strong grounding on the basic principles of development communication. Now, Cafe Scientifique, like what we are going to have this afternoon, is part of our initiatives to reach out and bring science closer to the public. As we all know, culturally speaking, many people see science as an elitist endeavor. This shapes and also, in a way, reflects our science culture, where science has become an ambiguous activity. Science is both good and bad, real and magical, mysterious and omniscient, serious and funny, dangerous, but also solver of our society's problems. So we hope that by conducting a series of Café Scientifique in the future, which we will start now, we would get scientists and non-scientists to start talking about science and engage in fruitful discussions that might lead to appreciation and then to appropriate action. So in this afternoon, we are very honored to have Dr. J.C. Gonzalez here to talk about the intricate and interesting relationship between people and birds, Ethno-Ornithology. And we'll make our discussion more informal and engaging, we hope. You can have as much coffee as you want. We hope that after this activity, we can renew our appreciation about one of the most important animals that we usually neglect talking about, which is birds. So in behalf of the department, I welcome you all. I'm very happy to have you here, that we all have here to learn something about birds. So good afternoon. Enjoy the bird story.
Hi everyone. So we're not calling you participants, we're calling you our friends. That's friends. Because we meet our friends over coffee, right? So we're friends. So we'd like to recognize everyone who came here for this Café Scientifique. Our friend from the Institute of Biological Sciences, Dr. Debbie Macandog. Our friend from the Department of Development Journalism, the College of DevCom, Prof. Pamela. Our friend, everybody's my friend. Our friend from the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Extension, Ms. Athena Custodi. And we have our friend from the Museum of Natural History, Mr. James Alvarez. And from the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines, we have two of our friends here, Mr. Jason Apolonio and Miss Jamie Chavez. Is this Chavez? Dick Chavez. Chavez. We're not yet that close. Our friends from Erie, we have Miss Janelle Ju of the Training Center, Miss Jel Aminias of the Rice Knowledge Bank, and Mr. Richard Smith. And then we have a friend from the Rotary Club West Bay, Miss Mildred Menino. And we have a science communication major. Actually, there are quite a number of science communication majors here. They're at the back. The younger looking friends over at the back. And then we have Mr. Roman Moreno here. The science communication major. We have Miss Avril Madrid from Sierra. And of course, Dr. Christine Maslon. Yung Derechor. Sir, saan pa kayo?
I'm here.
Retired and resting in Los Banos. And of course, some members of the faculty from the Department of SciComm. We have Sir Aldo Lim. And of course, we already introduced Sir Gary, Sir Mimi, and I'm Yay!
Alright. So, we have a video to show you to introduce our guest scientist friend this afternoon. Okay, so it's like a 9 minutes, 10-minute video.
But some of them are really territorial and they really go for you.
Yeah.
Morning.
Acting out. It's actually the Alexander Library for Ornithology. It's one of the few libraries devoted just for ornithology.
So I'm reading for DPhil in zoology, particularly ornithology, here at the Department of Zoology, at the Edward Grey Institute for Field Ornithology. I'm under a Ford Foundation International Fellowship Program scholarship, which is a 3-year program for me to study ornithology. Basically, I'm doing conservation biology and tropical ecology and evolution. I'm doing studies on hornbills, which we call calaw in the Philippines. So the Philippines is famous for calaws. There's 10 species in the Philippines out of 61 in the world. So imagine it's amazing. All of them are found only in the Philippines and nowhere else in the world. The most spectacular would be the Rufous hornbill, which is a very bright color, very charismatic. Well, choosing, Oxford is the top 5 universities in the world. And it's a privilege and an honor to be accepted in Oxford. For postgraduate study, I came here with my scholarship, so I brought my scholarship with me. So I applied in the Philippines first for the scholarship. It took me 2 years. So I applied in 2006, got accepted to the scholarship in 2007, and left the Philippines in 2008. But I've been going back and forth to the Philippines for my fieldwork. So my field site is also in the Philippines, which is the Northern Sierra Madre Natural Park, which is another fantastic place to do studies. It's a wonderful laboratory. So the Philippines now it's spectacular because of the natural resources. It's an amazing laboratory, not just for it's not actually a tourist place, but it's also a scientific area. I think it's an important place for scientific interest. Yes, I'm actually based in the University of the Philippines in Las Banos. I'm an associate professor there, and I'm on study leave for my PhD. For reasons there's no PhD program in zoology in the Philippines, the whole country. So it would be nice for all the Filipinos who had a degree in zoology to come back and start a program in zoology in the Philippines. For those people who don't have access to scholarship outside the country. So that's one of my plans when I get back, is to help build a program in zoology. It may not, we're all developing a lot of programs, postgraduate studies in response, one of which is wildlife science. But I hope to build up zoology as well. Well, it's a unique system. We also have what we call a college system here. So I'm also part of St. Anne's College, which is a wonderful contemporary college. So there's a lot of history involved in staying in colleges, there's a lot of traditions. So there's a sort of a culture shock at first, but luckily because we're Filipinos, we're bilingual basically, so we can adjust easily with our language. So, because access not going to say English. But also there's a lot of interesting traditions, and we had to dress up in formal attire. I think you've heard of the students in Oxford wearing gowns. So when you do your exams, you actually wear a self-mask. So that's, hindi ka lang basta papasok for your exam, you have to dress up for your exam into a formal wear. Kasi it's a big tradition. Even the graduation rites is a big tradition. They hold the traditions very well. It's very deep, I think the Filipinos are very well. I know students who finish much more earlier than me, so my program is about 3 to 4 years. People finish earlier, Filipinos as well finish earlier. So it's amazing that they're doing well their studies. There's an honor system as well, so they're really getting good honors in their studies. So at the moment there's 9 Filipinos in the roster for the school year, but there's also other British national Filipinos with British citizenship who are also in Oxford, and together we kind of meet up sometimes. So we actually formed what we call the Oxford Philippine Society. So it's a student society formed within Oxford University. It's now registered with the Clubs Committee. It also includes other students from Oxford Brooks. So it's an amazing way to meet other Filipino students and also to exchange experiences. So we're kind of very diverse, from theology, myself, zoology, to anthropology. Ornithology is basically the study of birds. It comes from the root word ornithos, which means bird. And it's a very broad science. It covers a lot of things, from ecology to behavior to genetics In my case, I'm looking into the phylogeny of hornbills, which is your relationship in taxonomic species within the group of hornbills. So how species are related to each other. Gosh, so then the Filipino members, I don't know, like 90 million? There's only a handful of wildlife biologists in the Philippines, but what's amazing is there are Filipinos studying wildlife, including birds. It's also a growing number of Filipinos who are appreciating birds. It's not just the science, but it's also appreciating how birds are, how unique they are, how beautiful they are. So there's a bird watching group called the Wild Bird Club of the Philippines. So it's a growing group of Filipinos based in the world. They're Filipinos engaged in bird watching. And in the UK, bird watching is one of the biggest hobbies. And so the Philippines is a perfect place to go for bird watching because we have like 600 species of birds, and about 200 species of those are found nowhere else but the Philippines. So a lot of things I've learned in Oxford. Basically, my study is on phylogenetics, and the Philippines being a perfect laboratory for speciation. So marami kang gamitin dun sa techniques na naaral ko to study the taxonomy of Philippine birds. There's a lot of taxonomic uncertainties. Marami pa tayong species na hindi natin ano talagang separate species or not because of the many islands. So in an archipelago, there's a lot of speciation. There's a lot of species undergoing speciation. So pwedeng i-apply yung molecular phylogenetics to help disentangle relationships between species and actually determine how many more species we have. Probably we have more than 200 endemic species. What I'm studying now, dapat na-apply mo siya. I know it's basic science, but dapat may application siya in the field. So knowing how many species you have, so taxonomy-wise, is knowing the number of species that are found in the Philippines. Doon na masasabi na how rich the biodiversity is in the Philippines. And we need to determine the actual statistics for that, like a particular area. But also need to look at the ecology, kung paano relating some species together. So I'm studying Calao and how it actually interacts as a disperser of seeds for certain endangered trees. Like nutmeg, for example. So it'll be dispersion of nutmeg. So maganda siya i-translate sa local feeling. So if you go back to say sa village, paano mo i-explain sa tao na importante yung kalaw kasi kung wala yung kalaw, wala tong punong ito. Kung wala tong punong ito, wala tong bubot na to. So you have to go through the entire, it's not just you're using the science and apply it to a certain level na maintindihan ng tao. Yes, I think the DOT has a program na developed na for bird watching. So there's a lot of companies who do bird watching in the Philippines. It's a matter of developing more kind of tours that are run by Filipinos. So ngayon medyo international yung group, but medyo kulang yung number of people doing the tours, given there's so many islands and there's so many places to go to. I think having a program has been developing for the last 10 years, so it's nice now. There are groups of Filipinos engaged in bird watching, so it also helps develop our sense of pride for our natural heritage. Because well, endemic birds are in a sense Filipinos themselves. They're unique to the country. There's 10 species sa Pilipinas ng kalaw. Iba-ibang klase. Each island may sarili silang species. Like for example, Palawan has the Palawan hornbill. Sulu has this, in Tawi-Tawi has the Sulu hornbill. In Mindanao there's 3 species. So most of them are just forest species, so sa gubat mo lang sila makikita. I got hooked the first time when I finished college. I went on an expedition within UPLB, and we were brought to a forest in Siniloan, and doon ko nakita yung kalaw, yung Rufous hornbill with the red beak, and they're cooperative breeders, so they come in family groups. So it's just amazing. I mean, very charismatic yung dating ng species. They're resonant, they have these loud voices, and they're forest birds. They fly over the canopy. They're frugivores. So marami aspects are very interesting to study about these species.
All right. So that's Sir JC. But actually, we were former students of Sir JC. So
Third generation.
yeah, because I was a student of Maria, and she was also a student of Sir. Yeah, so 2 generations of students of Sir JC Gonzalez. Okay. I can still recall when he comes to the class, with some insect bites or something. But yeah, that's so memorable to me. An indicator that you're so field-based and you're doing your job out there, and then of course sharing to us inside the classroom what he does outside. And another memorable memory or event or something about Sir JC's he can make bird calls, to mimic bird calls. Yeah, so some of the species. Maybe you can do kala later. No? Yeah. What else? We've actually did some research about some things that were not included in the video. By the way, that video was produced by, from the Office of the President for some graduate students or Filipinos
Visiting. President Kim was visiting the UK at the time, so he wanted to have a group of Filipinos during his visit. So I was second choice actually. First choice was Aldrin Maliari because he was in an FFI in Cambridge, but he wasn't available at the time, so I was second choice. So good thing he wasn't available, so I got the turn.
And Sir JC is also the recipient of the National Academy of Science and Technology 2011 Outstanding Young Scientist Award for Zoology, and the UPLB 2008 Outstanding Teacher Award for Biological Sciences, and the CAS College of Arts and Sciences 2002 Outstanding Alumni for Extension, and the 1992, going back, Luisito S. Puy Memorial Award for Best Undergraduate Thesis in Wildlife Biology and Systematics. So consistent. Yeah. Do you have anything to say about Sir JC?
Just on a personal note, hindi nyo to alam, Sir JC. But many of my classes, he was my teacher in Wildlife 101. Kasi we were supposed to take as DevCom students, we were supposed to take technical courses. So he was my laboratory instructor for Wildlife 101. And many of my classmates were quite taken with him because he was one of the few handsome professors. Sure, kasama kayo dito.
I'm part of the few.
Yes, you're part of the few handsome professors we had at that time. And he had a very practical approach to teaching wildlife. He had us go up Mount Makini and identify the species that we found there. Some of the species he knows by hearing, by sense of hearing. So we were quite amazed with that.
This one yung batch ni Amazon.
Kami yun, sir.
Yes,
Pero,
the Viper.
yep.
That was the batch.
Yes.
I mean, from the mine, when everybody goes, ah!
Yes, that's right. So, in Viper, medyo nag-panic. Everybody panicked because it was poisonous. But, it's okay. It's part of the adventure of wildlife.
Everybody had a photo with the Viper.
Of course. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, so let's welcome Sir JC.
I'm breaking the rules actually. Can I sit over here? And I'll just, I have a press room. Okay, everybody can hear me now? I'm breaking the rules actually. It says no PowerPoint, so we use the PowerPoint for that. So most of the introduction, again, good afternoon, I'm JC, or JP for short. It's a bit long for Juan Carlos. So this actually is my thesis in a nutshell. Although my thesis actually changed through the series, to the length of my 4 years in Oxford. So this is my original plan, which is looking into the evolution and then the ecology of a particular group of birds, which is the Philippine Hornbills. Actually, it's a very long story that I came in as a Ford Foundation scholar and said, I want to study Philippine Hornbills. And then I got this amazing set of advisors in the name of Ben Shelton, Joe Tobias and Nigel Collard, which are half and half graduates of both Oxford and Cambridge, and we're also connected with BirdLife International. It's amazing to get all that support for my thesis. So the weird thing was, that was my idea, and it gradually changed my stay. So from Philippine Hornbills, I had to do Hornbills of the world. So they did the phylogenetic work of Hornbills of the world. I had to do 6 months of field work in Sierra Madre to do the ecology part, which was later taken out of my thesis because it didn't jive with the rest. So I actually cried that night, the day that my supervisor said, oh, by the way, remember those 3 chapters that you wrote and you did in Sierra Madre? Oh, let's take it out of your thesis. Oh, 6 months. I lost 30 kilograms. So fine, I think I got something from that. And then the Ethno-Ornithology part, I was supposed to do a study, which in Sierra Madre also, looking into the different indigenous people, Ifugao, Ilonggo, and then the Agdas. It was amazing. I had all of them. I didn't realize I had all these paperwork involved in interviewing people from National, NCID, oh my god, all those people. And then eventually they said, oh, you don't need to do that. That sounds like a totally different thesis altogether. After doing all the paperwork and starting to interview people. So eventually, evolution lang yung natira sa thesis ko. Anyway, I'm still going to talk about it because I never had the chance to actually tell you what my original plan was. So just, most of the introduction I said already that very embarrassing video. It's really hard not to watch yourself. And then you realize, oh, I didn't realize the camera was pointing at my crotch and my nose. But I mean, I should have done this. So, Hornbills, why did I fall in love with Hornbills? In the video I said I watched this group of Hornbills fly over in Sinaloa. It's actually UP Niagara. They haven't been to UP Niagara. That was the first time. I don't think they have Hornbills anymore. Siguro yung outskirts ng UP Niagara, but not in the same west the way I saw it first. But it was, because they were so beautiful. Again, I will give that sound word. Ito yung call ng kalaw. It's very resonating. Oh, 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 oh. So they have this very loud, low tone, very resonating call. It actually is very amazing once you hear it. But hindi ka tulad sa akin, medyo not a very good example. But if you have chance to go to a really good forest in the Hill Kalo, they're fantastic birds. So of course, most of us would imagine what kalo is. Here's an example of a hornbill. Sazu, everybody knows Sazu. Sazu is a hornbill, although I don't think there is a really true blue African hornbill anyway. They invented it. It's different from, although very similar called, the fruit loops. That's not hornbill. That's actually a toucan. It's an ecological equivalent of the hornbill in the neotropics or in South America and Central America. So meron silang ecological equivalents. They have very similar long decurved bellies, which they use for catching. But it looks heavy, but it's very light. But it's amazing for, para tayo may tongs. Diba? If you want to get something from the tip. So at the tip of the branches are fruits. And mabigat sila, so they need to have these long tongs to pick up the fruits. It's a long, delicate forceps for getting fruits. Most of us have seen though hornbills in movies. This is actually the one sa taas. If you still remember, McGonagall was showing something to change an animal to a goblet. That is a scene in Harry Potter. Yung one? Yung one na Harry Potter one? The Sorcerer's Stone. And of course, everybody knows this is a great Indian hornbill. The top one is Bicanistes, which is an African forest hornbill. And the one below is a famous hornbill from Southeast Asia, the great Indian hornbill. Everybody is Roar, very good. So it's Katy Perry's MTV Roar.
Favorite.
Oh, at last, meron din nalagay na sa MTV anyway. The same bird actually appears in another movie, The Life of Pi. The opening scene, the opening credits. So once, siguro, all of us have seen a hornbill, not necessarily the kalo itself, but the hornbill as an example. Okay, so hornbills, there's about 62 species. I tried putting all the most significant from all over the world. So that's what I've studied eventually, studying all 62 species. They belong to the order Bucerotiformes. They're found from Africa to Asia. There's a lot of distinct characteristics. They have these similar feet with kingfishers and beaters. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but they're syndactyl feet, which is tatlo lang naman ang daliri ng ibon on the front, but the second or third or fourth was fused at the base. It's kind of a unique feature. But there are a lot of other unique features that are totally distinct to hornbills, one of which is a casque. Although there's another group of birds with casque, cassowaries. We're all familiar with cassowaries and the big casque here. Pero sila naman, there's very distinct casque on the top of the bill. So you actually see in some of those examples very large protrusions on the top of their bills. Another unique characteristic is nest sealing. Sometimes they call it plastering. So most of us are familiar that birds nest in holes. Sila, the female will plaster the opening of the hole into a small shape size to protect it from predators. Kaya nga, sometimes local people say, silosong ibon yan, kinukulong niya asawa. It's not actually the male that plasters her, it's the female who plasters herself. Even the fledglings, once the mother comes out, so may iwan yung nestlings, automatic sa nila say, open, maliwanag, plaster. Parang reverse claustrophobia. Okay, so again, there's about, ito medyo lumang kaya. There are 62 species, 54 species in 76 taxa, so there's the distribution of hornbills from around the world. It extends from West Africa up to the Solomon Islands. So, I tried narrowing down my studies. So I did a lot of studies about hornbills in the world. I also looked into the systematics of Asian hornbills. There's about 32 species there. As you can look there. These are examples of Asian hornbills. The Greek hornbill, of course, the Ceros, the plain-pouched hornbill, and distribution occurs from India to Solomon Islands. They're obligate frugivores. They're interesting to study all of them. They're also faunivores, meaning they complement their usual fruit-eating diet. Sino dito fruit eater? Anyone who's a frugivore? Frugivore, you supplement it with something else. So they also supplement, we call them faunivores because they eat small animals rather than just insects. So they eat snakes, geckos. I remember there's a Visayan terrific hornbill in Bacolod. The time we went there, they didn't realize that they were feeding it dog food anyway, and fruits. Sabi ko, nahuli ako ng butike, yung gecko from that. Then I brought it to the bird, and then the bird just did this. In other words, they were so excited to see a gecko. So I fed it the gecko, and I took the gecko, napasampas niya para swallowed it. And then a month after, tumawag sa akin yung caretaker ng zoo. We don't have any more geckos. It's my fault. We decimated the hornbill gecko population. So it does that, especially during the breeding season, it needs a supplement. We also feed on crabs and even snails. Of course, there are the forest birds. A lot of them are susceptible to habitat loss, and some of them are now considered endangered species. At the moment, there's about 10-12 species of hornbills out of the 62 in endangered list. Unfortunately, half of those are from the Philippines. So, kilala tayo around the world for not just hornbills, but also because we have the most endangered hornbills in the world. Two of which are in the critically endangered list. The Sulu hornbill, which sadly nobody knows how many are left, but an estimated 40. And you have Walden's hornbill, which is almost wild, but still there's probably about 100 left. Most of which are now in zoos. Okay, so having been active in hornbill research, I attended, this is my third international hornbill conference. It was actually the fifth where I got a bit of, swak na yung research to what everybody was expecting. So Alan Kemp and Nick Kemp actually wrote the big book on hornbills, so he's the hornbill expert. And he noted the importance of having an evaluation of the species. How many species do we have? Because there's a lot of changes with the advent of molecular phylogenetics. There's a lot of changes now. How many species are there? Actually, when I said there are 100 species in the Philippines. Yesterday, I attended, Monday, I attended the World Wildlife Day. Happy World Wildlife Day, by the way. And Harry Bowen mentioned there were 607 species of birds in the Philippines. Previous to that, I also attended another, which is the 9th Philippine Bird Festival in Zamboanga, 673 Philippine birds. Actually, I did my own list. I have 686. So sabi natin 673. So medyo outdated na may sinabi ng system. Because of these recent studies looking into species limits, now the number of species is changing. So yung used to sinasabi natin na one species becomes 5. So I want to be into that to help out in that analysis. So the least studied ones, West African species and the Philippines. Another thing that they pointed out was a lot of studies involve ethno-biological studies. Ethno meaning there is an interesting connection between, say, linguistics, arts, culture. So hindi lang siya in a sense of science, it's also looking into the connections. For me, if I look at ethno-ornithology, it's a mixture between anthropology and arts and ornithology. It's an amazing, because you can easily swap out what other things that you're interested in from, say, arts or watercolor. I wonder if you heard of Audubon's Birds of America. Or Gould's Birds of Asia. These are wonderful watercolors. Yun, medyo, nobody studies what happened to them. I mean, there's a lot of studies in terms of artistic drawings kung paano ginawa yun. The same thing with, say, tribes or people using animals in a sense directly. I'll give you a better definition of ethno-ornithology. So here was what happened then with my studies. I said, after attending that conference, I'm going to do this thing. I'm going to clarify looking at the species limits of hornbills, concentrating on the Philippines, supposedly, and extend the to West Africa, and then, of course, looking into the ethnobiological environments of those species. So that was my thesis, combining evolution as well as ecology, looking into a group of species, those from Luzon and Sierra Madre, and the effect of habitat degradation, diet, nesting. Because we wanted to know how does a species grow. If you have one species, you need an example of one. How much population is there? Kasi yun yung ginagamit for estimating the threat status, yung conservation status of the species. And of course, how much impact do people have on that species. So I did first was the molecular phylogeny. Pardon for the scientific word. I think everybody more or less has an idea of what molecular phylogenetics is. Phylogenetics is the study of the tree of life. It's looking into evolutionary relations. Just imagine your family tree. The same thing with animals, you have a family tree. But of course we're using DNA to look into, well, DNA is just one example of those molecules that you can use to create that tree. So I wanted to know, where did the Philippine hornbills come from? So there's already a lot of studies involved in looking into the phylogeny of hornbills. Including those done by Yale Media Organization. They used DNA to look into the relations to birds of the world. So sila sa malaking ganyan na big looking at. Very controversial. If you want to, there's actually a scandal involved. So you can Google that, scandal with DNA. It's an amazing story. Anyway, I'm not going to go on that. It's not mine. During the time I was doing my studies, I'm going to do molecular phylogenetics of hornbills. I realized there was somebody else doing it at the same time. There was a group by the Thailand Hornbill Research Foundation was also doing a hornbill phylogeny of the world. So imagine back if you found out, oh, we're doing the same thing. But rather than do it, I actually waited for them to finish and actually collaborate and say, I can build up on what you did. So I realized I found that actually what they did was incomplete, so I tried completing and filling in the gaps. So I did both mitochondrial and nuclear techniques. So they only use mitochondrial and also the complete decision. And this is a list of all the studies involved. So this was the incomplete list. This was done in 2003. That is a phylogenetic tree, using mitochondrial DNA of hornbills in the world. This is the Thai group. This is a group. Including Kemp and this, she's my idol, Pilay Punsuan. She's the queen of hornbills in Thailand. She has an amazing group of people researching about hornbills in the world. And she's also, she's a Rolex Laureate awardee. Of course, it's a Rolex, there's money involved. Parang it's the equivalent of Nobel Prize for scientists. So this is mine. I built that. That's my comprehensive molecular biology based on my popular information. So it's a complete list of all the species of hornbills. So actually, let me get you. I kind of looked at all the species and I emphasized on looking into other populations with more detail. Rather than just species, I also looked into subspecies in populations. And emphasis, of course, in the Philippines. So here are the examples of Philippine hornbills, beautiful species. Kita nyo talaga yung cask developing on the top of the hill. But again, it's not unsure. It's still quite weird kung ilan ba talaga species in the Philippines. The book Kennedy in 2000 published the field guide to the birds of the Philippines only had 5 species. So it's still incomplete. Bakit 5 lang? There should be more. So can you actually see that there are just 5 species in that picture? They all look different. I think there's more than 5 species. So ano ba talaga? So we had to look at all the populations. So aside from DNA, it's amazing. 16% of the world's hornbills is from the Philippines. So I had to look into just the molecular divergence based on DNA. We also looked into the morphology. So here is an example of the data set that I worked with for hornbills of the world with emphasis on the Philippines. So those are all the hornbills around the world. You actually pick out which ones are from the Philippines. Kaya yung Calo on the side, right side. There's a Palawan hornbill there. And anyway. Okay, so now I looked into morphological data. I've actually measured most of the specimens from most of the museums that were available to me, from the British Museum to Museum of Zoology in Cambridge, Oxford, in the Philippines. I had I had to travel not just with the National Museum, of course the UPLB Museum National Museum has about 10,000 specimens. Diliman has specimens, Siliman has specimens. I was able to visit another large collection, which is the Aga Khan Museum in Malawi City. So, amazing. They had the only specimen of the Sulu hornbill in the whole of the Philippines. If England had the only specimen of Sulu hornbill in the British Museum, it was Aga Khan, which had the prize, which is the Sulu hornbill. Kaya medyo napasigaw ako nung dinala sa akin ng collections. Oh, you mean this part? Nawa ka na sa bola. No! I didn't realize how important that specimen was.
Live or?
It was just skin. It was collected by, of course, the eminent wildlife biologist, Dr. Horn. So there's a lot more specimens in the US than there are in the Philippines. But that's the closest thing I could get to a specimen of the Sulu hornbill. So hindi ako makapunta ng tawi-tawi. Just to look at it. Yes, only in Marawi.
That's a small jump. No, I mean, he said border-wise, if you've already been to Anakan, you didn't easily gone to Sulu.
No, there's a lot of my aunt actually said, you're going to, so my aunt is from Cagayan de Oro. I'm going to Marawi to measure birds. Wala ka ba security details? No, I have these 2 friends with me. Nothing happened. And it's a beautiful place actually. Although I made a boo-boo about protocols. Because I had a friend, she was Muslim, and the first thing I did was extend my hand and handshake, and she was dalaga. In front of a lot of people, so I said, oh, should I take the meat? So I made a boo-boo. Buti na lang hindi ko siya nila for beso-beso. Or else, my God. So, this is a paper by 2 of my supervisors. It's an amazing publication. It was published in IPIS. It actually standardizes how we delimit species. So, marami tayong subspecies in the Philippines. Yes, we have 670 species. We have 1,200 subspecies. And that's the biggest problem. How many of those subspecies can be recognized as species? So, I was using hornbills as an example to see, ilan ba talaga? Kasi di ba ang hirap magsabi na iba-iba yung statistics. And we want to finalize how many species do we actually have. How can you do biodiversity conservation if you don't know how diverse it is? And biodiversity always comes with numbers. It's always numbers. It's the numbers here. So I applied, it's actually with my supervisors, Joseph Tobias and Nigel Collins. They had this criteria on how to delimit species. Funny enough, after I used this, I'm now applying it in my class, animal taxonomy. So some of my students are using, one of my students is actually using it for his thesis, been using it a few years. So I having the morphological basis
and also having the molecular basis, now have two different ideas of how to look into species deliverance. So here is a list of species that I looked into. I've compared 54 different populations using morphology. I was supposed to do a bit more acoustics and polls, but mahirap eh. But behavior, distribution, and stuff. Anyway, I won't go into the details of how I did it. But as long as, this is an example, so these are two species, two subspecies. The other one's from Luzon. This is a terrific one. The other one's from Polillo. They're both Penelopides manilae. The other one's Penelopides manilae on the left, Penelopides manilae subnigra on the right. So there are differences in morphology. Genetics say they're not that divergent, but you have going through the criteria isn't enough to separate them. So the score, I think, didn't pass the threshold of 7. So that means these two populations weren't enough to elevate as co-species. So I retained them as subspecies. So I did that for 54 pairs of hornbills from Asia. Yes, a lot of measurements. Actually, for each data set, I was measuring 16 individual males for each population. So a lot of measurements involved. So again, this is one looking into Samarensis. So there was already one that said they should split the Samar directed hornbill from the Mindanao directed hornbill. And looking at the phenotypic data, so here you have the biometrics, plumage, vocalization, and the threshold score to be able to say they're separate species was 7. So the final score is 7. So we then agreed that the Samar directed hornbill and the Mindanao directed hornbill are separate species. So it's one way of looking into delimitation. So again, from 5 species of hornbills originally, there's about 15 species of subspecies. So I looked into that as well. I'm just going to enumerate all the different groups of hornbills within Buceros. That's the distribution of the genus Buceros, which is the kalaw that we know, or the rufous hornbill. Hindi pa lang. Also, pag hihimay po sabihin nyo na. Okay, so there are 3 different subspecies of Buceros hydrocorax in the Philippines. That's Buceros hydrocorax hydrocorax. This is Buceros hydrocorax mindanensis, and this is Buceros hydrocorax semicardiacus. They sort of look different. Beautiful, aren't they? So my study was actually Kemp already suggested splitting them out, but he didn't. Kasi nga parang kulang pa yung data niya. So I was able to complete that data set. By the way, Kemp eventually became my examiner. So he gave me the exam. I was so proud of him. Galing-galing na talaga. Anyway, kasantakan niya. So nung nag-exam ako yesterday, I suddenly felt short. I know I'm 5'8", but I felt shorter. So the threshold of 7 was reached by Buceros and Mindanao. So that means the Mindanao subspecies should now be elevated to a full species. So there are now 2 species of hydrocorax, of Buceros, hydrocorax in Luzon and Mindanensis. Yung dalawa po sa baba. So these 2 are both Mindanensis because supposedly semicaliata should be separate as well. Pero the scoring did not reach 7. So even though I wanted to separate them because they look different, the scores did not reach 7. And genetically, they're actually divergent. So hindi din nagko-coincide yung genetics at saka yung morphology. So sometimes, idea that should be both. Pero nga, it doesn't follow. So kaya medyo na discompiado ko yung the word, yung cryptic species system. But again, we all have our opinions. So I'm just following what was on the score. So even though I wanted to separate semicaliatus, I had to follow the criteria. So I just put it as subspecies of Mindanensis. That was my recommendation to split these 2 together. Aceros is distributed here. There's 2 species, Waldeni and Eutycephalus. They were all recognized as separate species anyway, but there was always a question before. In Scientifique 2000, there were still 1 species. But now they're separate species. I just wanted to confirm that they were still separate species, and it agreed. Past the score of 7, they were genetically divergent. However, it actually, genetics-wise, they clustered with a group of birds called the Suluwesich rictic.
So that bird there, and that bird there, this one looks more similar to what we have, but that one is totally different. But genetically, it clustered with that bird. And there are similarities morphologically. So medyo nagulo na, yung Pinnipedis to, Acerosur, ano naging tamang genus nila? So somebody told me there were similar. I said, use Chronobrontes. Hindi daw pwede Chronobrontes. There's the rule of
priority in terms of publication. The older the publication, yun ang gagawin yung name.
So they had similarities between the oil glands, staccato call, they were similar. So may morphological basis to combine. So Barr found out that they should be changed to name Rhabdocalyptus. So hindi na po i-memorize. After memorizing Aceros for several years, you now realize you have to change the name. Yes, we have to change the name. Or else taxonomists will future jobs. Or taxonomists. So that means that particular species of Pseudomys, which also Pinnipedis, is now separate. So meaning Pinnipedis as a genus was now unique to the Philippines, an endemic genus. And used to be just one species, it is qualified I think, as a subspecies. There's also support that splitting it up. There are some species on the Shalat, it's called Pinnipedis panini. I know it's named after a sandwich. I still don't know why. So this is Pinnipedis panini, the scientific form. It's now split into Manilae, Panini, Mindorensis from Mindoro, and a Finnish one in that. So again, there were particular groups of species that should naturally separate. But my studies were able to confirm the split of, this is Samar, so that's Samar, yun yung now. So they do look different. Manilay po yung nasa Manilay. So we have Manilay. If anybody goes bird watching in Makili, what you'll see is going to be this Manilay, which is the Luzon. They have a weird call, it's not easy to copy. If you have a squeeze toy, yung baby squeeze toy, sa crate, parang ganun, it's very rubbery sound. That's the call of a chirectic. It's a very, and also the name itself is onomatopoeic. It's that, so like, so that's what you call it chirectic. So my data suggests that Samarensis and another subspecies from Basilan is a separate species from that of a phoenix. It's a bit weird because my supervisor doesn't agree with the Basilan part. It's not really that different. Whereas the criteria is the criteria. And they said, you created the criteria, I'm just following. So hindi siya nakaka. Anyway. Another set of subspecies, Panini picaensis, which is now an extinct subspecies, and Pinnipedis manilis from Bolivia. Again, the subspecies that became extinct on Ticao Island. So again, the threshold only follows for Samarensis. So where is Basilan? Basilan is over there, next to Zamboanga Peninsula. Okay, another one would be, another group of hornbills is Anthropoceras, it's the pied hornbills. They're distributed on the western side of the Philippines, Cebu and Palawan. That is the Palawan hornbill. So if you have these big Palawan, you'll probably see that. Again, they have a high-pitched call than the Kalaw and the Turictic. Very similar to the Turictic in some ways, though. Very high-pitched. If you stayed in El Nido, especially in Lagen or in Mindanao Island, you probably awoke into this. Kaya nga yung term before about hornbills, something called it Reloj del Monte, or the clock of the mountains. It is clock of the mountains. Every time I was there for research, living in a cabana ba o cottage? Over the water.
Cottage.
Cottage lang pa hindi mo expensive. Of course, meron everything's brought to you in. So the Kala always, the Brahmins always perch on top of the cottage and wake you up at 6 in the morning. So it's a very recent clay, and we sometimes call them the pieds because of their color is black and white. Before we didn't realize some baka related to Sulu hornbill because there's another hornbill in Borneo called the black hornbill. The Malayan black hornbill. Sabi nila yun yung related. So we realized, based on my study, that the Sulu hornbill wasn't a black hornbill in the Philippines, but it was actually a black-billed Palawan hornbill. So mas related siya dun sa Palawan. Okay, so going back to that, I was able to split these two into two species. What were the conservation issues that we needed to look into? The species that we now recognize as Rufous hornbill now, before the split, is a near-threatened species. And most of these conservation status are based on not just population estimates, but also distribution. So if you're unique in a particular area, you have a narrow area of occupancy, then it's a different issue. So now separating this into two species reduces the area of occupancy. So that means they're actually in more threat status than they actually know. Okay, knowing now that they're separate species and they have increased threat status, I wanted to know, is there an impact in their population in the wild? So I did studies on the Luzon Rufous hornbill and the Luzon tree. As an example, because we didn't know much about the ecology of hornbills in the wild. What they were eating, where did they nest, did they actually compete being in the same place for food? So nesting preferences, diet, and of course also look at populations across habitat regions, whether they use the same habitats or not. Of course, the perfect place to do that would be, saan ka makakita ng pristine forest, would be in Santa Madre. Yes, I lost 30 kilograms. So this was my son. Biro nyo nilalakad ko yan every day. Oh my God. And I remember. At tama yung point ni Winnie na puro ko galis-galis. Yung nickname. I even have pictures of me being bitten by a mosquito and the birds being bitten by mosquitoes. At least hindi ako nilisa. So looked at the position of nest trees, or possible nest trees in terms of the stages. So site A was my primary site, it was a good forest. B was slightly okay, it was secondary forest, medyo na-log siya before. And C was being logged at the time. It also had plantations there very close to agroforestry. So the trees were distributed in this way. So kasi hornbills required large trees. Not just because they were treated good for them as an indicator for a good forest, but because they nested on large trees with large cavities. And they're big birds. Hindi mo sila pwede paitlogin in a small nest. Kailangan kasya sila.
How big can they get?
Oh gosh, good point. They're about a kilo in size. So a Ecology horn is about this big, a Rufous horn is this big. But malaki sila, but also very light. They look big, but they're actually very light. So 1 kilogram for this big bird is already understand. I think size-wise, they have big heads, big bills, and cats. So the cavity should be big. Because if they wanted a big cavity, that they can downsize. Because they're plastering. They would plaster the hole. Also because they have 3 to 4 eggs, which become 3 to 4 young, which, well, their size are big babies. They're big nested. Hindi sila yung sparrow size. Their babies are about this big. So it has to fit into that large cavity. So there are not enough cavities and not enough trees with cavities. So your percentage gets lower. So we needed tree diameter of more than 1 meter in diameter of the tree for them to have sufficient cavities. Mostly the pterocarps. Of course they would still use 1 or 2 other species, but the majority of the species were the pterocarps. And these are the same trees that people would log because sila yung Philippine mahogany na tinatawag natin. So these are examples of the nest tree. So you can actually see the rufous there. So I look into both the Luzon tree, which is smaller, and the Kala, which is bigger in terms of the size that we use. So at the height, they needed about 40 meters. So luckily, I wasn't the one going up to check the nest. I had somebody else. I wanted to, but my university didn't allow me to go. Oh, you need to have a harness, training, blah, blah. Okay. Mama, ko na kayo. And they were free climbing it. They didn't have a harness. They were amazing people. My guides were abducted. Okay. So this is like about 40 meters. The size in centimeters, the depth of the cavity, we have the cavity width and size.
Do they make the holes themselves?
No, it has to be pre-made. So minsan yung sa holes na naputol na branch.
Pag na fungus yun, mapuputol, may naiiwan. Basically, kasakit yung puno to create the cavity. Yung Luzon, because it's smaller, may use the second decavity nesters. They'll use woodpecker's nest. I mean, it has to be a big woodpecker. And even the big woodpecker, which is the white-bellied one, are rare. They also look into diets. So red shows the cala, which is Moceros, and Philippinas. It's just a series of families of fruits that I'm looking into. So notice there's a few species which overlaps, and there's 2 species which doesn't. So 44% of the food choice that they had were shared. So meaning half and half. It's okay for them to share. Kaya wala masyadong dispute. There's a degree of competition between them, but because there's almost less than 50% overlap, so hindi masyadong problem with competition.
So how did you find out this?
We flew forward from the nest itself. So I had to collect seeds from each of the nests, also collect the material after they left. So because it's not just the seeds all around it, but also the ones that were inside the cavity. And yeah, I have to go through not just seeds, but pieces.
And you identified it using just
the seeds
or DNA?
No, with the seeds.
Oh, so just
the seeds. Some of them are still unknown at the family level. I was able to, but of course I had help. The greatest help was he was amazing in identifying the seeds and the fruits. I had to also collect fruits from all the trees around the area. Get the seed, clean out the seeds, and then compare that with the seeds that I got. Because there was no database to work with. So, and then the fruits that I was able to identify, I was able to compare with the seeds that I have. The fruits I don't know what they are, because I do have a minor in botany, but it wasn't sufficient to identify. It's a good thing Leonard Poe was there at the time. It was with great help. Actually, he was the one who pushed me to do my study. Says there was higher diversity and richness in terms of the Luzon. So yung Luzon, less picky about the foods it eats. Also, that's why there's a set of species that the calo didn't eat. Because it was also found in lower canopy, so it was able to tolerate other kinds of fruits that the calo didn't eat. So it foraged on other foods, so then not much of a competition. And also was able to feed on foods that were found in disturbed areas. So here are some of the species of trees, fruits that were eaten by both the medyo na identified of the species level. Interesting is Canary mispili, so they feed on milipili. Aglia is what we call pink mahogany. They have these large, so most of these are actually large seeded trees. They have these big fruits that were things that open up. And they revealed this brightly colored fruit with the seed in it, and the seeds were always large because they were large birds. And these trees were indicative of primary forest and secondary forest. So sila yung nutmeg fruit. Everybody loves nutmeg, especially when a coffee, nutmeg flavored coffee. So nutmeg menistica is an example of those very large seeds. So that means the hornbills are important in dispersing large seed trees. So you have a lot of frugivores, from bulbuls to pigeons. Yes, you have them, but they won't be able to distribute these trees. Yes, parrots are big, but they're seed destroyers rather than seed dispersers. Kaya nga diba, pag nagpapakain ka ng parrot, seeds. So Buceros had a limited food choice, and most of the species that it actually ate were trees that were rare themselves. One species was the species Miristica, Hornbills, which is, that's the one, large, very large fruit with a beautiful red arrow. So it's kind of an endangered hornbill that disperses the seeds of an endangered tree. It was an amazing connection. At the time when I was doing my study, it makes sense. Hey, I also looked into the influence of habitat degradation feeding. I looked into population densities between the two species across 3 different sites. And one which was good, not so much in the other, in a degraded site. Well, I thought it was degraded. But compared with Makini, it was okay still in the forest. But that was the area, my disturbed site was actually an agroforest site, which still had nice trees. But also because logging was ongoing in that place. So I did work on 3 sites, each of which was 16 hectares. So these are, this is the distribution of trees within the area. So the dark green refers to the large trees, which just give you an idea of where the primary forest is. Of course, the smaller trees are in very light green, so that means the greater forest have the most little trees and the least large trees. So those are the 3 sites. It's going up the mountain. A, that was the large bones. B was secondary forest. Medyo may malalaking puno, still regular forest. C, of course, that's degraded. So there's a decline of large trees in Site C. So here is the population of buceros. Buceros in red and Pteryctic in yellow. So notice something? A, B, C. A, there was a sufficient number of species, still a lot of Pteryctics. B, declining calaw, and C, no calaw at all. So in the degraded forest, you didn't have calaw. So it was a bit alarming because even looking at the population density, it was already low, even in a good forest. So meron kami tinatawag na empty forest syndrome. So why was it that it was one of the best looking forests in the Philippines, but even the Hornbills were not that looking? There's something wrong. Maybe my data was wrong. And then I found out that Lala Española from Ecology also did another just on the adjacent forest on the next town in Dibilacan. And she also found out that the calaw was declining in good forests. So what was wrong? Why was it low density in good forests? This should be high. So paano pa dun sa, diba? The Philippines has a lot of degraded forests. It was kind of alarming what happened with that. Of course, Scientifique Hornbill, okay. Not much of a problem. Yes, it's slightly declined, but still they were very tolerant, I'm sure. So we also looked into different frugivores. I'm not going to dwell on that. But here is just picked out a few species which we thought were directly connected to the hornbills themselves, these forest trees, and whether they had the same decline. Not much direct decline, but most of the Meristica, the nutmegs, were in low density in the area. Aglia, which was more related to Pteryctics, were more or less okay. So merong konting correlation between larger seeds are low density because the calaw was also low density. So there's sort of a relationship. Hindi masyado yung correlation. Here you can see it better with the species between Penelope and Buceros. So in Meristica and Aglia, kind of verse which a bit more correlation with Buceros and Banos. But I don't know if I'm going to go a bit further. So here is Nima. It's another nutmeg. Notice it's always bright colored arrows around this. It's actually advertising that hello calaw, dispersed weeds. And it's also because of the long beaks of calaw that they were able to pick on that particular. So no other frugivores, some frugivores are able to. It's more attuned to a relationship. I'm not going to say this is directly linked or mutualism between hornbills and these fruits. Okay, so going back to bakit nga ba konting hornbills in banana. So I wanted to know the relationship of people. Of course, automatically, some hunting, may isip mo. There's always an effect of hunting. So I wanted to look into what people who would actually use these hornbills in their cultural or anthropological uses. So it's just, everybody knows the Igorot Festival. It's a certain festival in Cordillera, which involves a headdress with hornbills on it. Actually, it was in Vida Escudero 2 weeks ago. And there was a dance, and then they forgot dance. And everybody, all the males, had a headdress with a calaw. And then just like, oh, laughing ko, ay, paper mache. So I said, very good. Of course, this little boy had a real hornbill on his head. And this was Peñabeño. So imagine if you have, di ba, usually yung mga nagsasayaw, di ba sa atin we have our street dances. If there's 50 kids, they would have 50 hornbills on their heads.
Good thing I only had this picture. Hindi ko na nakita na sa likod. So hindi ko picture yan. I've never been to Penang. So I wanted to go to Penang just to check whether there were real hornbills on the deck. But this one did. So, I'll just go through that definition of ethno-ornithology. So it is sort of, it's not, I mean, ethno-ornithology is not just birds and anthropology. It also covers arts, linguistics. There's a lot of things where you can look at it. Even bird names, for example, are part of it. It's just a growing group of stuff. It's not, I don't know how much science is there, but it's a good merge. It's intermediate study. So if you want to look at a really good gist, there's a book called Birds and People by my supervisor, Rachel Collar. It's an amazing coffee table book which shows you ethno-ornithology in a nutshell, of course with pictures. It's defined as the growth and study of relation between people and birds. So, dun na yung anthropological, cognitive, linguistics. So it's now a growing group of people, ornithologists, moving into that field. And I think the Philippines is a perfect place for that. And hornbills are another example for it because of our relationship with that species. It has these implications to conservation. By the way, if anybody recognizes, that's Lucia Lastimosa. If you've seen the movie Dr. Dolittle, she's a real Dr. Dolittle. Actually, that's a Walden's hornbill. It's a particularly endangered hornbill which she breeds. Every time I come over and visit her, all the animals respond to her. And parang talaga siyang Dr. Dolittle. So here's just an example of connections between hornbills around the world and man. This up there is a decoy which they use for hunting. So they actually use a real head of a hornbill for hunting. Over there is a necklace of woody warrior, lights hornbill on it. The hetung or hornbill jade. And there's a hornbill jade in Villa Escudero. These are, ito yung ginagawa nila ng Netsuke. Heard of Netsuke? Di ba yung mga samurai warriors? Kung baga tayo, meron tayong cellphone, may mga nakalawit. Sila naman yung samurai na may nakalawit tayo. Yun yung Netsuke. So it's always made out of bone or antlers. They also use hornbill jade. And it's taken from the hornbill called the helmeted hornbill, which grows really thick because they kind of aerial jousting. So they're very territorial, they can bang their heads in the air. So it builds up, rather than being a hollow cast, they have a solid cast. Yan yung kinakarba ng Chinese, they get it from Borneo and then bring it to China and carve it. This is the Nishi tribe from India, and they adore the hornbills. Too much that it is a badge of, for males, a badge of honor, or something that to become a man, you must have a hornbill on your head. Of course, the hornbill is, it's a real hornbill, so namatay. Actually, met a guy who's a policeman who does amazing conservation work. Gumagawa siya ng fiberglass boats. So I tried out making those bills that they use for adornments from fiberglass. And they can make it, but pre-order. Do you want the pink one? Or do you want the bright blue one? Ultraviolet? And then she tried to like, ooh, that's better. So now they stop hunting the hornbills and prefer these fiberglass versions. There's a study actually on hunting in Borneo. That's a paper by Elizabeth Bennett. She actually studied about 9 or 13 tribes in Borneo and how they're connected to hornbills. So iba-iba. So Dayaks actually have very beautiful elaborate tattoos. They have tattoo tools, elaborate effigies, even hornbill tattoos. So sila yung hornbills are actually a totem animal. Spiritual for sila. Actually, it's a hornbill that brings you from when you die. It brings you through the next life. So they have a real connection with hornbills. So Dayak and the Ibans even actually have their own festival called Dawai, Kenyana. Kenyana means hornbill. To a point that, of course, there's another slide here. Oh no. Sarawak, which is one of the states of Malaysia, it's called Bumi Kenyana, the land of the hornbills. It's amazing to have these strong connections with hornbills. We have, of course, 9 species on the island. Tayo, we have 12 species. I don't know how much connection we have at the moment, but of course, it's now growing.
So in the Philippines, there's 12 na ngayon, but based on yung separation. 9 pa yun mga kasi ako. Wala tayong nag-cut and paste ng PowerPoint na. So the conservation has 5 threatened species, 2 threatened races, which are again elevated as species, and 1 distinct subspecies, which is the decal hornbill. Now yung distribution of hornbills in the Philippines. So you can actually see a hornbill on almost every island. Almost every island. Of course, except Cebu. Ay, ba't di ko nakulayan ng Bohol? Ah, mistake. Meron sa Bohol actually. Dalawa. Nagkamali lang ako. So if you look at Ethno-Ornithology, we're using hornbills as an example of why they distribute throughout the Philippines. There's also a wide distribution of indigenous people, and each one may have a connection to hornbills. But nobody knows. Has anybody documented that? So trying to document every connection with every species of bird is hard enough. Ano pa kaya for just starting with hornbill? There's a lot of lumads from Mindanao, the Agda, also Austronesian, are scattered throughout the Philippines. And of course, the Caldera have this direct connection. And even with languages, linguistics, ano ba yung name? The name always changes. It's weird thing, it's just balud, which is Imperial Pigeon, doesn't change throughout the Philippines. There's even an island in Cebu, the island of Cebu, they have this bird called the flower pecker. On the northern side, they call it Panayoko. On the middle, it's called Anagoko. And then it goes down south, Anayoko. It's the same bird on the same island, but they always change names. But nobody's actually documented. And as long, people change, tribes will change, and it gets lost.
Dusan dadaan, gugugud di mamanak man kay ngan, di kaadwan, at sak mailadawan, kinapiltas na't atam, at aduan dat nasnastaan. Sikaut kapintasan, sinamsamok apu kabunyan bibili, kahit nogan. Numoyak pa'y paswoy, kaiyak pa'y mandangol, ulilipan noon na awon.
Non-verbal community. How do you interpret the gestures, the sounds that don't have words? So probably that's the intersection of our disciplines. Okay. And what I found interesting in your presentation would be the names, because it's very, very significant, because that's where people find meaning in objects and other forms of life. So that would be a very interesting study, because probably the secret to people understanding the importance of ecology and hornbills and all the things related to it would be in the names they attach to this particular thing.
I should agree with that, because it was just the documentation of the names itself. So I was with my Akta guides. I had the privilege of joining a lot of Akta tribes, villages, should be called it. I'm an anthropologist friend, but don't use the word tribes. Should be indigenous people. Anyway, so I've met a lot of them and tried to gather most of the names of the species of birds that were around in my study area. Because it was interesting that they had names for specific species. They're also taxonomists themselves. It's just a different language. And there's always an equivalent species for each. For example, I had these 3 species of fruit dogs. They were all the genus Pinelopus, Merilite, Pinelopus occipitalis, Pinelopus arcangella. They had names for each, and they were almost the same thing as the word fruit dog, which was balud, balud primera, balud segunda, balud in Spanish. But they had these adopted names for it. So they were then taxonomists themselves. And they're also birders themselves, because they can identify them in the field, even by calls. Actually, I had to learn most of them from these people. So they was talking about which bird because I didn't have familiarity with all this, especially a lot of Sierra Madre and Lennox. So they can actually do the research themselves. It's just a matter of connecting what they know with that of the science itself, in terms of say taxonomy and species known to ornithology. It's just linking those two together. So they can actually do surveys themselves. So sabihin nila na, oh, by the way, we don't see Tinopus marine anymore, or si Balot Primera, hindi na namin nakikita. So automatically, that's already an observation in itself. It may not sound scientific, but it's still data. And it's a big thing as citizen science. Because as birders, bird watchers actually do citizen science. I think it was in the UK, where they use that and actually get the information from your garden birds from your backyard. How much did you count the number of this number of species in your backyard? And I think that's about the point that as Filipinos we acknowledge rather than your reaction of oh bird something. Should be to get a pen and paper and listen down. We actually saw this species and then try to advocate citizen science.
That's true. The indigenous knowledge or the local knowledge, the people living close to nature, they really understand the ecology, the trees, the birds, and even the interaction with the soil.
The direct connection.
As scientists, we also have to learn from them.
I was learning a lot from them actually.
The same thing with our group, so we have also studied sa Muyong, they know the names, they have local names for all those trees. So kasama din namin yung guide namin, so they will say, this is the name of that one or that one. So we just have to find ano yung scientific name. Yung iba, walang scientific name, but then
Actually, the first meeting I had with my guides, they actually asked me the first question. It was a really hard question. Why do we need to save bacalao? Diba, in a scientific way, because it's a dangerous species, dami mo sasabihin, blah, 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 blah. But then it's not useful. You have to put it in a context that they can understand directly, that affects them. So the kala is important because it is a good indicator for the Tagalog, indicator of species because it disperses this fruit, and this fruit is what you need for this and this. So there has to be a connection somewhere for them to use that. And to a point, at the end of the 6 months, I think because my guide was also the tribal leader, gosh, it was a bit too much actually. So I'm now going to protect the Kalao. So they put these parang these pieces of cloth on rope. They tie around it was his land. So it's an indicator that, oh, don't come into my land, that's my land. And I'll shoot an arrow on somebody's head who tries to kill a Kalao. Oh! You can protect a Kalao, but not that much. You don't have to kill somebody for it. But again, that was dedication. It's amazing. I think that was the best kind of result that I had in my thesis. It wasn't the DNA blah blah tree. It was this guy telling me that I now understand what you're doing, and I'm going to protect the Kalao.
How knowledgeable are these indigenous people of the importance of Kalao? Because if you studied in that area, so most likely they're the only ones to understand because they ask you how important it is. So there's like a big gap in communicating to these people that you live in the forest, you have to protect whatever's there. Do you think any organization or research institutions can help that?
I think it's a lot of NGOs are merging these gaps. But again, it's not easy. I think it's easier with IPs. Because they live in the forest. Or at least they live exactly with the animals. It's more of the migrants that are an issue. Kasi they have different values, which may be different from the judging in the forest. Sila yung nagkakainin, sila yung nagkahunt, for reasons na. And the Agda doesn't eat the hornbills, they only eat the feathers. Because they think there's an importance to the hornbills spiritually. But it's the migrants who came there, say, Trocano, but they don't have a direct connection. All they see is, ooh, that would look nice as inasal. So wala silang direct connection. But they might have that connection before, they just lost it.
Sir?
Yeah, in relation to what you said about the connection, what were your insights when you juxtapose your findings from the evolution science aspect of your research, like the genetics of Kala, to the ethno-ornithology aspect of your research? Like, were there like interesting insights? Sorry, or maybe I missed that part of the lecture because I went out. But in terms of like comparing the things that we learned about genetic aspect of this study, and as well as yung ethno-ornithology part. So, ano yung learnings that you got?
Everything was a learning experience for me. In the sense na, akala ko yung ornithology was just like birds. It was all just bird. Now I had to learn so many things. There's integration of a lot of other things, even not just science. Kasi nga, you use phylogenetics, which is basically molecular biology, which is not my field. I had to learn molecular biology from scratch. And looking into morphometrics and the criteria and the limit, it was all that. Oh my God, I had to learn stuff again. And of course, I remember my teacher in stat one saying, JC, you need 95 in the finals to pass my course. So I wasn't good at it. So I had to learn a lot of things. Integrating that, so up to ethno-ornithology. Good thing most of my friends in Oxford were anthropologists, and they were helping me out understand a lot of things. And also ecology-wise, there's a lot of stuff involved. It's an integration of different studies. It may not actually end up in one integrated meaning. There was actually just filling in the gaps of the data that we have into making that consideration. But I mean, putting them all together, you have one answer now. Because each one had their own answer.
Because there are many interdisciplinary studies that they keep the disciplinary boundaries. But I think it's also a challenge to really draw lessons when once you really integrate those findings, especially if they're coming from different paradigms, like ethno-ornithology, we look at culture, symbols, meanings, and then you have this molecular biology, super hard science.
I mean, it's an amazing experience doing all of them and learning. It wasn't just a PhD, it's a lot of learning issues for me. What's also amazing is there's also a lot of permits involved, especially with the Philippines. Because with just the permits themselves and getting the samples and even with the IPs, I had to go to something like 48 different permits or letters. Kasi ang dami ganun. Ang nangawit na nga yung advisor ko ng kapatid mo. So there was a point that my supervisor said, JC, are you doing a PhD on permits?
Sir, is this something new, or I mean, is this a trend in the UK, in the US or in the UK, like this interdisciplinary type of study? Kasi parang when I look at it, it's so broad. Like there are so many components in one study. Do they really encourage like scientists, hard scientists to really, factor in, for example, the ethno part of it?
I think it is now. Everybody's doing integrated sciences, interdisciplinary. It's just a matter now. During the time that I did my study, there was a lot of influence. My supervisor was an evolutionist, so siya yung evolution about. Another advisor was more into ecology. I had a friend named Andy Gosler who did the first book on Ethno-Ornithology, and knew that I was from the Philippines. Oh, there's a lot of things you can study about that. So maraming influence from all these people that actually helped me.
I'm curious if there are a lot of like hard scientists or scientists from the technical biological field who are trained to do social sciences, than people from the social sciences who are forced to learn something about stat and molecular bio, because that's integration, that's integrative studies. So, pero feeling ko you see a lot of people doing that from the sciences to social sciences rather than the other way around. I'm not sure.
Social sciences to the hard sciences.
But also difficult from a biologist standpoint to go into social sciences. Kasi sabi na there's a lot of theoretical framework involved. Doon pa lang, I think, was an issue for me. What theoretical framework? And you have to read all these books. God, I read science books. If believe it or not, I haven't finished a novel. Anything without pictures makes me fall asleep.
So the only thing I've actually read in my life is a book called Raptor Red. It's a short novel by, that's not again, but anyway, it was a day in the life of Velociraptor. I don't go bias, but I tried finishing Queen of the Dam. So the last 2 chapters, I fell asleep. But anyway,
Siguro I'll suggest that you read Twilight series.
Yes!
Beginning to the end, hindi ko pinitaw.
Or if you fall asleep, watch the movie na lang.
I'd rather watch the movie. But I'm gonna try East of Eden next time, which is kind of a staple for anthropologists now. East of Eden. It's not more of a model; it's more of a biography. But again, having
So question from Gary. No, it's that question. In communication perspective, several researchers in communication now are going to using sciences also to explain, for example, attitude by analyzing the biochemical reactions when you have this. So I think there's really the trend that's really to integrate all of these disciplines in order to make sense of our world. And another thing is that until now there's a debate in science communication whether we train scientists to do communication or we train communicators to do science. So that's one of the debates that had been there for a long time in science communication. You know, there are strengths and limitations in both. But what is important, I think, is that we need to label whether you are a scientist or you are a social scientist. The issue is what you work.
I think the magic word is collaboration. You don't need to train for this and that. It's just a matter of 2 people knowing their fields and working together. Kasi mahirap din yung somebody like me trying to be somebody in communication, I'll do it half day.
That's true.
Diba? So maganda na it's both ways that you have the same people doing their best, knowing their own fields, and working. You have to meet halfway there. So hindi naman sa you're not learning, you're understanding rather than learning. You're understanding how things work on the other side, so you can work together.
That's true. I have a number of. Sorry, somebody wants to go ahead. I just want to share that I've been involved in a number of projects, and most of them are multidisciplinary. Yeah, that's right. So there will be forester, economists, social science, social chemistry, soil science, and ecology. And that's a good research team, and then you'll have a better understanding of the research from the research.
Actually, bioinformatics in a sense is a multidisciplinary field. And just looking at it, I was using this program called Beast. I know it's a weird name. Most of these programs, computer programs, is getting weirder names. There's one called AWD. Are we there yet? That was the name of the program. Because it wanted to know whether you've reached the right test. It was a test for something. So Beast actually creates phylogenetic trees. And it's not just looking at DNA to create the trees. It uses Bayesian statistics, which is Markov chain multiplier, which is a mathematical model, a statistical model. So it merges computers, mathematics, and biology together. And sabi nga parang how do I understand this? But it wasn't pushing me. Yes, it's better that you understand how it works, or how the concept is, but understanding how to use it was easier. So yun lang naman yung kailangan ko at the moment. And I'll try to get somebody else to help me whether I did it correctly. So it's still a collaboration. You have to understand how it works, but necessarily doesn't have to be the entire field of mathematics and statistics and all. 1 to 100 nga help na ako mag-count.
Actually, I was probably invited here because I do science editing and writing, but I'm actually going to ask you a question as a mom. I probably wouldn't ask you. But I have a 2-year-old toddler, and because my mother is a marine biologist, I remember growing up, going to the market, my mom goes, this scientific name, that scientific name. So now I teach my son, it's so easy for me to teach him from a tribe of fish. And I realized after hearing you, I barely tell him about more than, yes, that's the bird call, yeah, it's a bird. But it's just, you bring your background into your parenting. And I realized, where do I get a chart of birds so I can put it beside my chart of Philippine marine fishes at home? My son knows a pufferfish, and a shark, but hardly anything about birds because I don't know enough.
It's amazing because it's only just 2000 that we had Kennedy Guide, which is the field guide to the birds. Everybody in the world had a field guide to their country. We had DuPont in 1971, which is a hardbound book as heavy. Even added pictures, but it was just too heavy. But I mean, the field guide came in 2000, and then the photo guide came in about 2000. So that made things easier for us to identify. But again, yeah, yung na yung charts lang for schools. There is none. If you go to National Bookstore, the Philippine giraffe, there is no Philippine giraffe. Yes, there's a giraffe in Calawit, but that's not that here. So there's a lot of wrong things that you see. There's these charts that were actually taken. Okay, we're all taught A for apple. It's not A for appies. There's always that conception of the kulang talaga. People from Erie are here, and they'll be happy to answer. They have started that. There's the birds of Erie. They have a chart available. Amazing, I love that. Actually, well, I think I spent almost 3,000 pesos buying a calendar.
Ask for Richard.
I sent most of mine away.
So if you go to Rice World, they have, hopefully this is a poster. I have my poster pa.
Yeah, I don't think the exhibition's over. The posters went down. There was rumour it was going to go on tour, so I have no idea where we could go.
When was it put down?
In the last month, I would say.
But you still have the Rice Today magazine.
Yes.
So that has a chart inside, 2 pages. You can open it. And of course the Birds of Erie calendar.
And also we've just started work on a Birds of Rice book. We're trying to figure out kind of what kind of stuff to have, you know, otherwise it's just going to turn into another
Where's your field end?
Yeah. Where's the end? Do we count things going over? And, so we're still in the talking stage about that, but hopefully somebody's got their fingers crossed for September time this year. But you're going to have to keep it on the shop. That's how we got it.
That's why I have coffee there all the time. Just to check
Actually, last December I gave you a postcard that
Yes,
Vice Chancellor made.
Yes,
It's for birds.
Birds of Beauty.
And it was, so yung mga postcards yun na funded by President Pascual. And then he asked me to give you the
Yeah, we had a talk already, so we would start making.
The Vice Chancellor for Research and Extension actually is encouraging you to submit a proposal to OPA, and then she might find some funds for you to maybe come up also with postcards. It's maybe Hornbills of the Philippines, or maybe a child or something like that.
I should realize that when I actually attended the last International Hornbill Conference, which was here in the Philippines in 2013 last year. It was amazing because Thailand came in and brought every conceivable souvenir associated with hornbills, including a pin of their hornbills of Thailand and hornbills of the Philippines. So like, oh, it's a pin of the Philippine hornbill, made in Thailand. So parang, it's a bit parang nakakahiya because in the Philippines, we only had stickers, diba? It was produced by Wild Bird Club, and that was it. You know, there's a lot of things that you can actually sell and market to improve awareness. The postcards are one of the, kasi nga lang ay bukad actually. Bukad ng postcards. Usually e-cards not so many. But I mean, postcards can never die. I mean, they're always there.
Actually, pang Christmas Eve,
Yes.
President
Christmas cards. I actually created a Christmas card for Hornbill na Rufus Hornbill with the Santa hat. Kasi red eh. So yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, hornbills are just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of things that can be done beyond hornbills. There's a lot. We have 673 other birds, well, 60 other birds to make use of, and a lot of endemic mammals, and endemic butterflies, and fishes. There's so many things to study. I mean, the Philippines is a biodiversity rich. It's a hotspot for biodiversity.
So these hornbills are associated with certain natural parks.
Yes.
Yeah, because I think with the OP and with with the DNR, we have projects so that there's a different national parks.
I actually have in my bag an example. I just got this in the weekend. flagship species are hornbills. So everything
related to conservation of hornbills and maybe some other species in the Philippines. The role of zoos in ex situ conservation of Philippine species. But I remember in one of my classes when I was in undergrad, conservation biology, one of the issues there is how effective is the ex situ conservation in preserving or conserving Philippine species, and is it really advisable to put them in that kind of environment and then aiming to release them in the wild and hoping that they will proliferate?
There is an issue. I mean, ornithology is quite divided in terms of ex situ and in situ. There is the side where you have captive studies in captive biology, because ornithology also uses captive species to study behavior in the laboratory. But it's better to understand it in the field. The same thing with conservation. This conservation actually should be in the wild, in the natural habitat. However, there are issues wherein the species are hunted as babies. You can't release babies into the wild; they'll die. So you have to raise them themselves. Unless you have a proper protocol to raise them correctly, you know, with the puppets and everything, that it will still retain their wild. You have to, it's really hard now. You need a parent bird to teach it, eat this, not this. Diba? How would you tell a cow to eat the nutmeg and not this other? Oh, by the way, that's poisonous, you'll die. So it's really hard to do that in a captive setting. So those birds will grow up in a different way. If you release them, asan yung grapes? Asan yung papaya? Diba? Because that's what they learn in captive environments. The thing is, we want to keep them alive rather than usually dapat euthanasia already. But in a concept, because you can also use these birds as a flagship for conservation, because they're there, they're attractive, they're used to people, and then you can use that to teach kids to be more aware. Kaya mag-okay din yung zoos in a way because they help in education. But yeah, important pa rin you have them in the wild. There's a lot of rescue centers which do that, but the problem is yung proper protocols of safely saying, are you functioning as a rescue center? Are you looking into health? Are these proper cages? Are you sure na walang daga yung loob ng cage mo every time? But you get used to, you get tired of going to Manila Zoo and saying, oh look, it's a nice duck. Is the rat part of the exhibit? Or the cockroach part of the exhibit? Diba? It's nakakainis. Kasi nga walang protocols ako. I think there are 1 or 2 zoos in the Philippines which almost at the level of international zoos. I would say that. Of course, there are rescue centers like the one in Bacolod, which is into captive breeding. She's actually captive breeding 2 endangered species of hornbills, the Scientifique and Walden's Riffid hornbill. So those are captive. They're not actually for show to people. It's a breeding facility to help breed the species because they're endangered, and eventually raise them in the world, just like the Philippine Center.
I remember visiting Malabon Zoo, and parang gusto namin hanapin yung may-ari. Parang sabi, are you insane? Putting a hornbill in a 1 by 1 by 1 cage, and it's
not even a flight cage. Yeah. It's just a cage.
It's very flight.
It wouldn't be able to fly inside a cage.
Yung condition ng bird, it's parang
very stressed.
hinihintay mo na siyang mamatay, parang ganun. Pinapanood mo na lang siyang mamatay. Parang kami as wildlife biologists, parang for the sake of earning money from the visitors that enter the zoo, but they sacrifice it. They compromise the safety of the animal, the health of the animals.
Actually, remember that it actually closed down now. There was a mini zoo in the middle of Ayala Center. At the time, still used quad.
Oh yeah.
Everybody knows Ayala Center now, but the older generation used to call it quad. Call it quad. Quad. So in the middle of quad 1 and quad 2, there was a mini zoo there. It was air conditioned, and it was all glass. And they had a display for Rufus Hornbill. And the Rufus Hornbill's cage was about this size glass. And there was only 3 perches. So so we have 3 perches like that. So the rufous one would just go, I'll jump here, then I'll jump here, and I'll jump here, and I'll jump here, and I'll jump here. It was doing that all day. So parang, yes, it's good for awareness. It's a very nice concept for people to do, especially with kids. It's a glass partition. But a welfare issue, not so. So we have to create that. It's okay to have it in captivity for as long as you manage it properly. It's effective because it has a conservation program. But if you don't have the proper protocols to get the right program, then it's not effective.
What can you say about our conservation policies?
It's improved. I mean, compared to say 20 years ago. Wala tayong Animal Welfare Act, wala tayong Wildlife Act. And there was this weird one they called to.for. Remember that one? Oh my God. It actually prevented people from doing studies.
The bioprospecting?
The bioprospecting. It's weird because we were the ones who wanted to get permits so that our studies were legal. It took us 2 years just to get a permit. If you had a 1-year funding, goodbye na yung funding mo, hindi pa nakukuha yung permit mo. But people they wanted to control, which were the illegal ones, were still doing because nobody was actually policing them in the first place.
So policy-wise is okay, but what about the implementation?
Yes, wala nag-implement. So, na-implement lang if you were applying for it. They only knew that someone was going to do this because we applied for it. But nobody went out into the field to actually check that, oh, there were hornbills being caught in this town.
Because we did a survey on biodiversity awareness. It's really low. Nobody really understood what it is. In different key biodiversity areas. We did it last year. And it was really very surprising when you talk especially to LGU people. They don't know what to do.
But now that's changed actually. In the last 20, 25 years, that was the scenario.
But at least they know that they have that species in their area, but it's only up to that level. What to do with it.
But no, I think compared to me now, there's a lot more awareness within the system. And implementation-wise, I think it's getting stronger. So I think there is hope. I know it's quite slow in how things develop.
Very slow, but I think Pauli has...
There is a lot of programs to try to push it. I mean, there's a lot of... Actually, we don't... everybody knows that Pauli has changed their name. It's no longer Pauli. It's now BNB. Biodiversity Management Bureau. I just found out Monday, by the way. So you call it Pao BB first, it's now BB. Which is cute.
We were in fact commissioned by the Pao BB surveillance last year. Because they wanted to beef up their advocacies. So they wanted to know the level of knowledge and awareness of the ground, especially near the KBAs and the PACs.
Yeah, I think that's why it's really important now to develop market instruments like paper ecosystem services for biodiversity. Para ma-encourage yung mga people up there to really look after the biodiversity because it is so much benefits. Like going back to your ecological study on yung size or age ng tree and yung height, there's a requirement, diba, yung size ng Gonzalez, so that it can be used as a nesting site for the birds. And then, as in our results, baby birds are very important in dispersing the seeds, and it is very important in the distribution and growth of different Ethno-Ornithology species. So I think it's a very good combination of you have the tree, the source, and then you have the one that's involved in dispersal. It's very similar to pollination syndrome with flowers.
Both keystone
And,
species.
but this one, yeah, you have the trees and then the seed dispersal, which you do hand in hand. So you must have enough shelter for them and food for them. And I think it's also these trees that are producing foods, which are the source of energy and nutrition for these birds, and they are responsible for the proliferation of these trees. And they're very important in conservation. So maybe that's why this principle of ecological principle.
So very basic ecological.
Yeah, that's true. It's very basic.
So basically just food web.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, in a nutshell. And then, in the Philippines, we don't have this, we don't apply these theories in conservation ecology. It's more of raising them in industries and then we're using them in the wild, which is maybe it won't be successful because there might not be enough SPPs available for them, there might be enough food for them, so they will just start out in the wild for us. We conserve the food and then just individual interactions with different species.
Actually, it's in the matter of how we translate things together in terms of new data and analytic data. So in my case, when I finished my thesis, I actually sat around with the DNR, the regional DNR that was in charge of Banos, the Senro and the Penro. They were very, very supportive. Not just because they gave me the permit. They were willing to understand what I was doing there. So I actually made these field guides, yung photo guides. I had these pictures of birds with me, so a photo guide would help them. Kasi how would you do your policing of the forest? You don't know what the birds are policing for. The hunters know what they are, but you don't. So you don't know which one is, endangered though yet. I don't know what it looks like. So I had to build in these photo guides for them and left it with them. So it would help them understand a bit of what they're supposed to do. Also in the standpoint of the local government, I think it was a bit overnight because they were going, we like this part, it's beautiful, and we realized there were still a lot of these kalaw in Balana. And then they said, we're going to do a festival of the kalaw. I don't think it's not copyrighted. It's for everyone. Also, the kalaw is not just found in Balana, it's also found in Balana. It's our own bird. It's good that you're thinking of it as your natural heritage, but it's everybody else's natural. But it's fine, do what you want to do. So I don't know, I didn't realize because I wasn't there to attend the festival anymore, but they did venerate, sort of, parang put the kalaw in a context. So let's protect it because it's our own. So it's very similar to what I did in Polillo when I did my master's there. So they're not changed. Yeah. See that picture that most of the islands in the Philippines, you have an arch, a welcome arch with an eagle. So when I did my study there, I kind of put to the LGU the importance of the Polillo territorial hornbill, which is an endemic subspecies to their island. They changed that eagle and turned it into a territorial hornbill. So it's now, it's one of the only kinds of in the Philippines where you have a hornbill welcoming you to their town. And they actually changed, it's going to be next week, they're going to have the Polillo territorial hornbill festival. So that's actually part of the festival. Not that close to us yet. Kasi it's on a Wednesday. I mean, it's just an example of how your studies, maybe how simple, we're not necessarily direct at the same time. It can be translated how important it is to the local people, to the DNR, or whoever actually needs, more into the stakeholders themselves.
Sir, I have a burning question and comment. Now that we've mentioned something about heritage and action conservation, because right now if you see in papers, like we're talking, there's this bill pushing for the declaration of so many things in the Philippines as national, like national transportation, jeepney, national food like adobo, national art, all those guys. Yeah, I think appropriate. And I don't know if how they arrive at like declaring a particular object as a symbol of our heritage. But I think this kind of study, like a very interdisciplinary integrative study, should be the right way of really knowing what would be our, the symbols and heritage that we have to consider, or we have to declare, or we have to recognize as talagang heritage, and would be a symbol of our culture, of the country, of the Filipinos. yung ganyan, no, na process. And in relation to that, because there are some like from the civil society here, like the president of Rotary Club of West Bay is here. There are some members from the World Bird Club of the Philippines, and then we have Attorney Sensen Cabal from the Division of Social Sciences, but doing practice. Okay, so I want to ask you, how do you drumbeat like citizen science? Because at some point you touch on the concept of citizen science, and we don't usually get to see like hard scientists or the natural physical scientists who are, telling the policymakers or the public that these are the implications of my work to people to take action, like concrete actions. But like, in terms of who should do this, who should take the lead in doing this, like more organized way of doing this. Because in the UK, for instance, or in social sciences, like I know in the UK there's this mass observation project wherein you get people from different disciplines or from different walks of life to do social science research. Like they do observations, they take down notes, and then they have this archive wherein they submit.
Same thing with birds, actually.
Okay, so
RSPB does that.
do you think there's a promise in citizen science here in the Philippines?
One Bird Club, I'm also a member of One Bird Club of the Philippines, and it's a classic example of started out as a bird watching club, and they're actually really good at identifying sections, and they're very picky about how correct identification is. To the point that that's not in the book. And they're now discovering new records, birds that weren't recorded in the Philippines before. And because now there's a jump in the list, it's not just the phylogenetic thing that helps split species of what I'm doing. Because they're existing as a taxon. They're already known. It's just splitting and putting them in a different classification. But these are birds that weren't listed in the Philippines before. So it's a matter that when a lot more birders became aware in the Philippines, before it was mostly foreign birders becoming winning. Of course, it still happened, but because there are now a lot of they're seasonal migrants, they come in at a certain time for a short period of time, trying to. They also do not that familiar with the birds. They come here to understand the birds, rather than actually they're seeing it all the time and being more familiar with the species. But now you have these local birders that are just a large set of eyes, looking into the horizon and thinking, oh, that's a bird there. We haven't seen. Which helped jump to, it just bloated the checklist. And that's citizen science, because they're not ornithologists. Some of them are businessmen, some of them are lawyers, photographers, advertisers. They have different jobs, but it's their passion is finding birds and looking at birds. Maybe medyo hirap tayo tansin, ano ginagawa mong hobby mo? Tumitingin ng people. It's just a matter of translation. If you say bird watching in the UK, it means girl watching as well. Sorry? Because it means bird also means girl, right?
Yeah, well, yes, you can do.
Yeah. But here, you say bird, it's always say birdie, it's always male.
Yeah.
So I say bird watching, you're watching birdies.
sometimes they use that as, like euphemizing cruising, like gay cruising, for like, what are you doing at that bar? Bird watching.
Because it's a different translation. Also, there's bird names that you can't use out loud when you're bird watching. If you're out in the field going, oh look, it's a yellow-belted bulbul, and there's a lot of other people, bulbul daw. Bulbul. Diba? Parang common lang. Oh, that's the elegant tit. What if there's two? If you tit too elegant, see? Iba mga tapos business na pinag-uusapan nila. So sometimes it is a bit hard doing bird watching in the Philippines. It's an amazing hobby. And it's a classic example of citizen science.
So you have a website you can visit? You have a website you can visit?
My website is just here's a wild bird website. It's birdwatch.ph.
Sorry, I think one of the key steps to bring bird watching more down onto a citizen level is to have something like the list of birds from the Wildlife Bird being published.
True.
Because it's not available at the moment as far as I'm aware. And like a rarities committee, that's fine, you could submit as much as you want to a rarities committee. If it's going on a piece of paper and somebody's Doppler is useless. It needs to be it needs to go through. The birdwatching is referred to by the RSPB in the UK. It's massive because we've got the RSPB who take control of this and really push it. You need someone to augment, to have it to be theirs, to be their child, to push out to other people. As far as I'm aware, in the Philippines, there isn't anyone to really do that.
But also, there's a lot of other bird watching clubs. Oriental Bird Club, who actually publishes the data that they get. I think that's where we publish most of our new records.
I would say, but from a scientific point of view, I mean the score of the foretell isn't that high compared to ibis. I mean, ibis is one of the bigger ones.
I need to have a paper.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you need to be publishing in higher journals to get a recognition in science, but then you still need the average person in the street needs to see these things every day for it to really take off.
And that's where communication comes in. It's translating the science into something more palatable and easily digested by everyone.
So on the core, I was actually ready for publication. It's just that I haven't controlled. So because I have this genetic component, so yung morphology ba all ang problema yan. I have to submit the genes for example. 370 different sequences. So it takes time. Actually supposed to be easy, it's just me. Tamad. To just submit it and send it to IDs. This is all formatted for IDs already. Yeah, 4 papers to finish.
Correct. Any last question, comment, or we're all talked out?
I do have one little recommendation. Okay. Everybody wants to do something about birds. If you do, one is Ethno-Ornithology. A lot of documentation still is lacking. I think classic examples is any human interaction with birds go past and it current. So yung mga past hindi na document, what do we do? Like, a lot of fables, poems are really lost because nobody uses them anymore. So I actually heard a Bacalao song in Cebu, which is weird because there are no Bacalaos in Cebu. It's a kind of odd thing that you have. There is still a song in Cebuana, which is kind of again, a lot of things need to document. And it don't have to be an ornithologist or an anthropologist to do that.
Last. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Sige, last two.
Thank you. Yes, just to add, one of the missions that we as science communicators is really to bridge the gap between the public and pointing out what Sir from the National Museum said. So maybe we can work on that as well. So, but I'm just concerned, are there any lobbying groups or initiatives so that we can actually maximize the potential of the youth for mobilization with regards to this issue or whatnot?
Should be based on the data.
Not really based on the data or whatnot, but are there already groups or initiatives from your side or whatnot? So that for us to be informed about these things.
Well, there's two things that I'm involved with is One Bird Club. So we have the Philippine Bird Festival every year.
Yes, it should be really active.
I mean, it goes place to place. So I was there to be lecturer for 2 days. This is a 2-day event. The first day is for elementary and high school. So the set of lectures that actually is more tuned to me. And then the second day, which I give a lecture on Hornbills for college students. So may different levels.
Where's in the next one?
Iba-iba kasi. It's always the previous was Manila. So sinundan niya was Dumaguete. So it goes around the Philippines. Kasi hindi dapat just one place.
I hope the also taps was like us. We can tap students, the youth, especially the youth. The power of the youth when it comes to mobilization.
So that is more on the public. There's another organization involved, which is Wildlife Conservation Society of the Philippines, which also works on birds and also all the general biodiversity issues. But it's more into conservation and management issues. So doon dumadating naman yung scientists and even the DNRs there. So they attend those meetings. We also have certain then you have another one which is PSSN, Philippine Society for the ASBP naman, which is Association of Systematic Biologists in the Philippines. Yun naman yung for taxonomists.
So there's a lot of actually events within a certain group. Pero wala is, they try to convey it into an awareness program. So, kasi nga it's a meeting of specialists. It's meant to specialists because it's a certain group. So there's only a limited number of stakeholders for that. But they try to translate it to something useful beyond the science. For most of them.
Wondering, how about the Department of Tourism? Do they
Oh,
provide
amazing.
funds for awareness? Just like the OST, no? We can apply for funds to do research. The ENR, we can also apply to do some conservative management or research also in whatever area. But maybe with DOT.
There is amazing support from DOT.
And then for communication or for awareness raising for Hornbills, and then pwede rin sa mga tourism sites nila o din sa mga national parks, destination parks.
The DOT actually published a book, Bird Watching Sites in the Philippines. Yung how ko sa video last, that said Philippines, that's one volume. There's 2 volumes of that book that was published by the DOT, trying to sell out, not just into all birders of the world, not just the Philippines, where you can find good sites for bird watching. Kasi one of their major programs or advocating in the DOT was bird watching and diving. So those were 2 ecotourism sites na kailangan nilang i-promote. It was amazing support.
Like yung sustainable tourism yun, no? So maybe pwedeng mag-tailor for the different national parks, endangered species.
I was actually a volunteer for DOT for 2 years, DOT UK. So we were there to attend the UK Bird Fair, which is the biggest bird fair event, bird watching event in the UK. So we were there for like 4 days, and we had the Philippines always had the biggest booth. It was amazing support. I mean, Lala and I were there, and of course the DOT weren't bird watchers or we weren't ornithologists. So we were the ones there to answer the bird questions, and even hardly had lunch. I mean, just everything was pouring. A lot of people were asking. It's amazing how much the interest was. Sabi ko, mas sana ganito din sa Pilipinas. In terms of the Filipinos coming to a booth and saying, oh, I want to see this. Where do you find this? What is the difference between this? There's a lot of bird questions involved in that 4 days.
Actually, especially for young families, like Atiban niya, miski ako rin kasi I had a very young family when we were in Australia. O di ba yung mga bata kasi pagtutrama natin sa smart kangaroo and the wallaby and the other area. So yung pag-uwi dito medyo sila, I think that's actually for raising awareness. About birds.
Actually, there's a new animation called The Hornbill and the Shaman. You can see it on YouTube. It's by Dennis Sebastian. He actually submitted it in the Metro Manila Film Festival. Yeah, it's The Hornbill and the Shaman. You can Google. I think I have a copy here. I'm allowed to preview it because I don't have the permission. But it's on YouTube. The name is Hale and Mabapi. Hale Kalaw and Mabapi, meaning shaman. So just Google that. I was gonna think about that at the computer science department because there is remember CSI? There was this part, I think it was CSI last season, when they had this fragment of a thing that vinyl, and then they had this name that tune in blah blah blah. Yeah. So you can get that tune and then be able to identify what song it was, even though it's only 2 tunes. And you can do the same thing with birds.
They have it.
Database.
They have it with leaves, sir, for taxonomy, with trees. But and I think they have it in the western side of the world. They have it for wildlife. And yung my point. While I was talking to Matt, when you ask people of my age, this was before I took up Wildlife 101 last semester. When I was asked before what's my favorite bird, or what birds do I know here in the Philippines, I would answer Maya or Philippine eagle. Maya is not from the Philippines, right? It's not.
Well, Maya is a general term for sparrow.
Oh yeah, for sparrow. I mean, there are a lot. 9 species of sparrow. Yeah, and I mean, people would say that I know Maya the passer, and after I
took up Wildlife 101, I was just totally amazed of what we have. And moving on from there, my town, Balanga City, we have this Ibong Dayo Festival.
Yeah. Balanga was there in Zamboanga. They had their own booth.
And the I like it, but the problem is they're celebrating birds not from us, and we have a lot of birds. And when you were talking about the Malaysian logo for tourism, it's like cheap the panda of the WWF. People are rallying for conservation of this panda even though they don't know it. And the story behind this, that logo is that it was panda. Yeah, it was panda. I forgot the name. It's cheap or whatever. Yeah, and I think when I heard that from you, I suddenly remember my favorite Philippine bird, the Philippine trogon, and it's the representation of the Philippine colors. It was red, yellow, and blue in one bird.
It's always developed as Siete Colores.
Yeah.
You always try to
really
develop anything beautiful, Siete Colores.
Yeah.
And that's a classic example of Siete Colores.
And people don't. I just met that bird last semester.
The most prominent color would be magenta on the chest.
Yeah.
Bright magenta on the chest.
It's so majestic, and it can sum up the Philippines in itself. And yeah, I think it's a work of not just for the technical people, and it's still our work as science communicators to really make a buzz or to let people be aware of this, so they would know other birds aside from Maya.
And take a job, there's very little known about it.
Yeah.
Ecology-wise, habitat, food, very little known about it.
Genetics as well.
Some extent already genetic. But it means looking into subspecies, that's absolutely okay. It's just means somebody did a treat for trogon. That was it. I mean, there's a subspecies, a bird that was named after the wife of Rabol, which is Harpactes ardens Lina. It was named after Lina Rabor, which is the wife of Dr. Rabor. It's amazing. And she was from Los Banos. She lived here.
Siguro din, sir, yung idea ng, I am a bird watcher, a very amateur bird watcher, and I try to... I am interested in reading books and drawing birds. Actually, I started drawing birds, but I am interested in buying a lot of bird books, but all I can get was British birds, North American birds, but I can't get anything from the Philippines or about the Philippine birds because it's too expensive. The Kennedy one.
There is a book on birds of the Philippines.
Yeah, I know.
It's the Fisher one. You can get it in National Bookstore.
Oh,
and sometimes it's sale sila 250 lang. So you have to check. Meron yata sa Kalamba.
Yeah, but I read the 2000 the field guide going.
Oh, that's good. But there is a pocket guide.
Yeah.
There's that down, which is just I agree the idea that we were talking about because the information is quite expensive, books, papers, etc. Why not make our student notebooks with cover of the Philippine wildlife?
Instead of artists.
There is, the problem it wasn't popular.
But we have to do the popularization side.
Yes, so there was a company called,
we can do it.
There was a company called Bookmark.
Oh,
by the way. Yes, lahat ng nature products na, they were the first one to do the nature product. Postcard. They published a book, Philippine Wildlife. It's a small booklet. They also did all those notebooks with covers of Tamara. He was there, but it's just people just didn't catch on it. I think
maybe you should
be on the squad and Judah.
We should give it for
Scientifique on evolution, ecology, and ethno-ornithology as tools for conservation and science communication for development in this 5th day of March 2014 at the Coffee Plants Grove, Los Banos College, Laguna. Thanks for your time and come connect with us. Thank you.